Here we've got the faulty gauge. You can see it's cracked and leaking. There's the new gauge. This is a nice little 6AN adapter that will go on the end of the fuel rail right here. Replace this floppy line here. Take it from this side over to this side. That way we can use a much shorter AN line with 2 flare seal fittings. Be sure to throw a little Teflon tape on your gauge before you thread it in. There's the old gauge cracked and leaking. There's the nut on the back. Toss a wrench on there. Hold the regulator so you can break it free. After you get the gauge loose, you should be able to unthread it the rest of the way by hand, pretty easy. Make sure you've removed all fuel pressure from the system so you don't have any squirts or leaks as you do this. Thread the new gauge into the same port. Don't go too tight with your hand, that's what the nut and the wrench are for. Go ahead and snug it up the rest of the way with the wrench. Make sure to get the numbers aligned so you can read it easily. Now that the gauge is in, we'll go over to the fuel rail. It's time to take this little adapter out and replace it with this nice flared 6AN adapter. It's got the O-ring there on the bottom. You can see the hardware on the rail right now is also a little bit janky. We'll deal with that in a moment. With the old fitting out, you'll want to make sure that there's no gunk where the O-ring is going to seal. You can clean off the surface as well. Here you see the new stainless steel hardware. There's the old pieces of hardware. Before you put the new fitting in, be sure you get a little bit of lube on the O-ring so you don't cut it as you press it in. As you press the fitting down, you should feel the O-ring snugly slide in. That lubricant will make sure you don't cut it. Line up the holes and tighten down the hardware. Back to the fuel pressure regulator, I've pulled out this AN fitting. You can see someone has put Teflon tape on the AN fitting. That is not correct. AN fittings will seal on this flared area, not on the threads. So again, never put Teflon tape on this side of any AN fitting. With the Teflon tape removed, go ahead and thread the fitting back into the regulator. I've also now got a crush washer behind the fitting to help it seal properly. After you've got it finger tight, go ahead and throw a wrench on there and snug it up proper. The fuel line is now going to go from this fitting over to the fuel rail and this fitting that we just put in. We can now use a much shorter braided AN line. Don't forget to plug the back side of the fuel pressure regulator where we removed the fitting earlier. You'll also need a crush washer on this fitting to ensure it seals properly. Get it snugged and then throw a wrench on it. Now we can install the nice braided AN fuel line. This is great because there's no hose clamps and it seals by the flared fittings on either side. With the new line in place, go ahead and throw a wrench on there and snug up the fittings. I'm using old fittings, so I don't care if I fuck up the anodizing. If you do care, be sure to use an aluminum wrench or throw some tape over a steel wrench. With everything all tightened up, prime the fuel system and check for pressure. You can see on the gauge we're good. Now go around to every fitting that you've worked on and check for any leaks. You don't want a leak. That could result in an engine fire. Obviously that's never a good thing. With no leaks found, you might want to leave the fuel system sit with pressure for about 10 minutes. Assuming no leaks after the car sat for 10 minutes with pressure, go ahead and start the engine. This car runs quite high fuel pressure because it's on E85 and small injectors. So you can see we're about 4.8 bar. You can also see when you rev the engine and vacuum decreases, the fuel pressure rises, which is perfect.